This interview with Senator Paula Simons is a must-watch for every Canadian, but especially if they live in Alberta. She skewers the Alberta Separatist movement in no uncertain terms. This is what Alberta needs from its other politicians, starting with UCP Premier Danielle Smith, who actively encourages the separatists while claiming that she is an ardent Canadian. Alberta can't have enough leaders stepping up to oppose a movement that is embarrassingly incompetent, yet still seems to be growing. Alberta needs more Paula Simons. Paula, I want to talk about the end of your speech, which a message to Albertans, and you
Yeah.
talked about separatism. Please explain what you said.
Well, I mean, this is what I was just alluding to. Imagine that you are a private capital person with a lot of zillion million dollars, which I do not have. Do you want to invest in a province that keeps making noises about threatening to separate? I mean, I do not know what, cannabis-based what cannabis-based products the people in the Alberta separatist movement have been smoking or eating or rubbing on their bodies. But we are a landlocked province of less than 5 million people with a premier who's now apparently anti-immigration. Um, uh, and where do we think we're going to sell our stuff? I mean, the ports of Prince Rupert and Vancouver are absolutely essential to Alberta's economy in every way for products in and products out. If we don't have access and telling me, as so many separatists do, oh well, there's a United Nations convention that says we can build a pipeline. These are people who hate the United Nations and every other United Nations convention. This one they're going to put their faith in. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. People are not going to invest here if we're behaving like a tin pot banana republic. And I mean, why would they? I mean, even Alberta's energy people, like, the big players like ATCO, are getting very cold feet about investing. So, we need to shut up about this. I mean, and it's not just investment capital, it's labor mobility. Alberta's secret sauce is that when the economy here expands, people come flooding in
Yeah.
from the Miramichi, from Corner Brook, from Cape Breton, from Ontario, from
From
Saskatchewan,
Vancouver
from the
Island.
Northwest Territories. Yeah, people flood here to work. And then when that big project is done, people either go home or they fly in and fly out. I mean, Alberta's entire economic model only functions because of the labor mobility of being a united country. And the fact that Alberta can simultaneously be talking about needing to break down interprovincial trade and labor barriers and being a sovereign nation. I mean, I don't know how people think this is going to work. We used to snicker at Quebec and their Sovereignty Association, which is English for wanting to have your cake and eat it too. So when I hear Alberta separatists saying, "Oh well, we'd be a separate country, but maybe we'd keep Canadian passports, maybe we'd still have access to all Canadian infrastructure," I mean, why would we? And do we honestly think? Because people will leave. People like my daughter, who's a young lawyer, she's moved to Vancouver, right? I mean, people will leave if we try to become a separate country. Then we're going to be what, like a country of 3 million people with no access to tidewater? I mean, I don't even understand how people think this is plausible.
There was a document came out yesterday, the day before, the Alberta Prosperity Project, which is
Yes,
separate.
indeed. From
And
Jeff Rath's gang. Yep.
they claim that it's possible for Alberta to produce 9.5 million barrels of oil per day. Now, Paula, I'm going to test your understanding of the global energy system. How many barrels per day, million barrels per day, do you of heavy crude, which is what Alberta,
What we make, yep, for the most part.
how much in the entire world, how much is consumed per day?
I don't know, Markin, but I sense that you want to tell me.
10 million barrels per day. So Alberta wants to produce 9.5 million barrels of the 10 million barrel a day market. And I think the Saudis might object to that, or the
Well,
Iraqis.
but I mean, as I say, who's going to do the work? Where are the workers going to come from to build the plants and run the plants and build the pipelines and fill the pipelines? Where are the pipelines going to go? Are they, because if you can take if you can take it as far as Lloydminster, I mean, I think the real question to ask, because you can't have you can't have a logical debate with these people. I know this will shock you, a champion high school debater in my salad days. And we always began our debates by saying, so the debate can proceed on a ground of common understanding. We'll define the terms so that we're all debating about the same thing. But we're not debating about the same thing. So I can offer all kinds of rebuttal evidence about why separatism is a bad thing. That's not even what the argument is about. The argument is about a fantasy of a, it's like what does Ken call it in the Barbie movie, the Mojo Dojo? You know, they want Disneyland for straight white dudes, in which women will have fewer rights and there will be no pesky immigrants. And I don't know what we're going to do with the First Nations, but I mean, it's a fantasy born out of fear. It's a fantasy born out of fear about losing economic and social domination. It's a fantasy built out of fear that the global market for oil is going to collapse. It's a fantasy built out of fear of global warming that we're pretending isn't happening. And so it's a fantasy land of, some kind of Wizard of Oz vision of the perfect utopia that they would build, where, what does Ken say? The male patriarchy involves horses. So, I mean, there would be lots of horses, and I mean, it's a very weird view of the world.
I have a little tidbit to share with you that I haven't shared with my viewers before. Uh, Canadians will remember 2022, the Freedom Convoy to
Hmm.
Ottawa, and the anti-vax movement,
Yep,
and it has been fairly bullying at the very, that would
that
be
would be a
quite
polite
right.
way of putting it. Yep.
I am now getting calls at home from Alberta separatists for berating me for my anti-separatist position. So,
Well,
I
I mean,
mean,
does this surprise you? I
yes,
mean,
it does. I mean, you used to be a journalist with the Edmonton Journal. Did you get calls at home?
well, I mean, how did they get your home number is an interesting question.
That is
Um,
an interesting question.
no, I mean,
Nevertheless,
I I made a joke when I was talking to David Cochran on Power and Politics the other day that, the summer after Bill C-69 passed, I was going to go to Calgary for Stampede. It would have been my first time as a senator, and we made a decision that it wasn't safe.
oh
I
my,
mean, we called it my summer of '69. I mean, I had death threats. Um, you know,
really? I did not know
oh,
that. Have you
oh,
talked publicly about this?
yeah. I mean, I'm a woman in public life, and I was on the Energy and Environment Committee, and I was really active in the debate about C-69 and C-48. You might remember I actually voted against C-48, and Jason Kenney had a press conference to condemn me for voting in favor of it.
I do remember that. Well, you do.
Yes.
We talked about
So, I mean, was I getting death threats? You bet I was getting death threats. And the only thing I can say now is this is like C-69 on steroids is what's going to happen with the Alberta separatism debate. And it's that cross-pollination of the anger in the post-COVID world of people who during COVID were terrified, lost their faith in government, lost their faith in science, lost their faith in the commonwealth of caring for their neighbors. And I think that plus Trump, plus plus
misinformation, disinformation
misinformation,
campaign.
the collapse of the mainstream media, and I think Russian money. I mean, we know that the Russians have been trying to fund right wing groups in Alberta. And, some of that money is coming up through the United States. People who call themselves the Alberta Republican Party. I mean, the toxicity of the American cultural debate is wild.
Yeah.
I I posted on LinkedIn, which is normally a fairly sane space, my horror at the anti-immigrant slant of the Alberta Next panel. And at first, I heard, sort of measured responses, but then people started to get more and more. I heard more and more angry people talking about how Alberta is flooded with illegal immigrants who are committing crime. I, this is not a thing. This is in part because we are on top of Montana, and there are not thousands and thousands of illegals streaming across the border at Coots. I mean,
Yeah. Not
that
a,
is not a thing that is happening. I mean, Alberta relies on immigrant labor in every single sector of its economy. It relies on immigrant talent and creativity and passion in every aspect of its social and public life. The idea that we are overrun with illegal immigrants who are committing crimes is fantastical, and it comes straight out of Fox News and every other right-wing podcast that, some people in Alberta are consuming and getting drunk on. So, I mean, this is a really dangerous time. And what I worry about, since First Nations have been in Alberta at the forefront of pushing back against separatism, that the chiefs of treaties 6, 7, and 8 have made it plain that Alberta is treaty land and that Alberta cannot unilaterally secede because those treaties are signed with the Crown, with the federal government, with the King and right of Canada. And I am really worried that once they finish being anti-immigrant, when is the right wing discourse going to say, you know what, we're tired of talking about Indigenous rights now. We're tired of, of Indigenous communities stopping the projects that grow our economy. And I think there is a real danger, not only of Indigenous protest and Indigenous pushback, but of the equal and opposite reaction to that being racist attacks on Indigenous people
sure.
increasing. And certainly, my Senate colleague Paul Prosper, who was a Mi'kmaq chief and a lawyer before joining the Senate, his office, when he spoke out against C5, received some very ugly correspondence and calls, very racist. So I think, this is a very potentially explosive cocktail. The xenophobia of the anti-racism, the straight out, old-fashioned racism against First Nations, Métis, Inuit peoples. Um, and, if certain political leaders keep lighting matches next to powder kegs, things will blow.
One of the things about Alberta that I lived there for 10 years, lived in Calgary, and knew some of the folks, in the PC party, but on the kind of extreme right wing, uh, they would be, ardent UCP members now. And one of the things I learned was there is a pipeline between the Republican Party in the United States and Alberta, and
Yeah.
those
Oh, absolutely.
evangelical, socially conservative people. And one of the things that they bring is organizational skills. And that is not to be sneered at because you can have money, but if you can't organize around, David Parker of Take Back Alberta has shown what you can do when you are a good organizer. Because for our American viewers, this
Yeah.
is a fellow who basically took over the United Conservative Party and pushed out a sitting premier, Jason Kenney, and installed the current one, Danielle Smith. So that organizing capability, combined with money, combined with all of the other toxic things we've talked about, that scares me.
Yeah. And it should. It should absolutely scare you. I mean, for your American listeners, and we are recording this on the 4th of July, Canada is facing an existential crisis. The threats that the American president has made to our economic security and, frankly, to our national security are real. And because you never know what he's going to say or do next, it makes it very difficult to figure out what your next step is. It's like, walking across that, a suspension bridge, and you never know, where it's going to tip or teeter. And I think, we saw with Brexit, we know now that international actors, especially Putin's Russia, played an instrumental role in inciting public opinion against the European Union in the United Kingdom. And if we start to see American dollars and American organizing power, and some of that money is being red, white, and blue washed because it's Russian money, it's terribly dangerous. I mean, I think in some ways, it's ironic. Alberta has been protected from the worst impulses of that far right because of the fact that we have such a huge Ukrainian population. And it's very difficult to make an argument in Alberta that Putin's a good guy. I mean, Daniel Smith tried. Daniel Smith, who, is part Ukrainian, at the beginning of the war was saying, well, maybe Russia has a point. And then, there are enough Ukrainian people in the conservative movement in Alberta who said, like, what are you talking about? So in some ways, I'm speaking to you from Edmonton, which is one of the centers of the Ukrainian diaspora, and has opened its doors to many people fleeing the war in Ukraine now. And I think it's very difficult to convince even the most right-wing Albertan that Putin is a good guy. That's not going to stop Russian money from coming in and polluting the political discourse here.
I think the political discourse, because this will come as a shock to you, Paula. We are in our 17th year of operation here at Energi Media. We started in 2008. We've been around a while, and we participated in many of these kinds of discussions. And I would say that the discourse in Alberta is already polluted and has been for a while.
Yeah,
And
but I mean, some of that was, self pollution. That's, you know,
yeah,
but
yeah, understood.
but this has ramped everything up.
Yes, it has.
And the fact, I used to be a columnist with the Edmonton Journal, which was one of the most profitable newspapers and news organizations in the entire country. We made money hand over fist. We had hundreds of thousands of daily readers. And when I wrote a column, it had impact because 200,000 people would read it. And sometimes the premier, whoever he or she was at the time, would say, oh, okay, that's not going to fly. We'll pivot. Well, these days, I mean, the daily newspapers in Edmonton and Calgary are shells of their former selves. I mean, and don't have the reach and don't have the impact. So not only are people not getting the facts they need, the original investigative journalism that turns up the information they need, they're also not getting columnists who have power. I mean, I'm the same person I was when I wrote for the Edmonton Journal 10 years ago, but my voice doesn't carry the way that it did. And it's very nice. You have a podcast. I have a podcast. I'm really excited. My podcast has now had 50,000 downloads, and I did a little happy dance until I thought that it used to be whatever I put in the Edmonton Journal had 50,000 reads over the breakfast table on a daily basis. So people don't have access to information. They don't have access to opinion makers who can change the government's mind. And so the government is not being held to account the way it used to be.
I want to share some information with you and our viewers. We don't brag about this a lot because we're Canadian. This is not our way. But Energy Media now is getting on its videos 3 million hits per month.
Wow.
We are probably one of the largest independent media in Canada. And a lot of our viewers, the majority, are in Alberta. So there is a very strong center left communities in Alberta, and that's our audience. So,
But
but
I don't think you have to be center left to want. I mean, if you were a classic conservative, you would want to make sure that there was an economic future for your grandchildren and your great grandchildren. I mean, conservatives used to care about conserving things, not blowing things up. And so the economic prosperity of Alberta, of Western Canada, of Canada itself, is contingent on the capacity of Albertans to grow an economy that will be functional for the next century. And doing the same thing the same way is not going to work. And I'm not saying that because I'm some radical leftist. I'm saying that because common sense tells you that if the global temperature continues to rise unabated, if the forests continue to burn at this rate, eventually we can whistle past the graveyard all we like. We are going to need to find alternate energy sources, and we're going to need to find ways of abating the consequences of climate change. And we better do that now, or the economic consequences are going to be dire 50 years from now.
let me share something else with you, Paula. I actually have a background for my graduate work 40 years ago in technology adoption. We won't get into that. I bore my viewers enough with that. But the point here is that we have, because we do a lot of work on the global energy transition, developed our own energy transition theory of change. And it's built around the idea that the clean energy technologies like wind and solar and EVs and batteries and stuff are disruptive technologies. And we've gamed it out into the future for Alberta. And by about 2032 to 2035, big oil companies in Alberta are in financial trouble.
Well,
That's our take.
and I think the biggest companies know that. I mean, I remember back when I was working on C69, when you talk to the really big players, the Shell, the Syncrude, they understood that. It's the smaller producers who have the best reason to be frightened and are the most frightened. But when I started as a senator 6.5 years ago, AI was,
Oh,
in a
what?
lab. It was a science fiction thing. Bitcoin, when did Bitcoin, the amount of electricity, the power drain for these computerized things, whether it's Bitcoin, blockchain, whatever your digital currency, and now the amount of electricity that is needed to power the stupidest chat GPT large language model nonsense. Um, you know, we're not decreasing our demand for electricity. I'm putting all of my LED Christmas lights on. I mean, that's nothing compared to what the energy that's going to be required for the compute capacity for the AI economy. We have to find ways of doing this. I mean, and I think people know this. I mean, Mark Carney wrote a book about it. Mark Carney was supposed to be the guy who understood how to get financial markets in alignment with the pressures of climate change so that we would get there, not not in a way where we all have to go back to, living in medieval lifestyles,
Right.
but where you actually, you know, it's like diverting a river, where you divert the capital stream so that it goes where it needs to go. But it will not do that out of benevolence or altruism. It will do that if it sees a return. And you don't see a return unless you give people a stable enough market economy. I had to laugh when when the Iranians closed the Straits of Hormuz the other day, and Donald Trump ordered all oil and gas companies to keep their prices low. It's like nothing like a capitalist who discovers that markets don't bend to his will like King Canute. When the markets decide, then the change will happen. But they're not going to decide that if they're marching on quicksand.
Paula, I know you got to get off to Calgary, so we're going to
You
wrap it
you said
up.
this is going to be 15 minutes, Markham. This has not been 15 minutes.
I I couldn't quiet you down. I'll blame it on you. But
I
here,
think that's fair.
let's bring this argument full circle. And because here at Energy Media, we argue that Alberta, as it has to deal with these global energy system changes, is better situated as a province of Canada so that it can
Yep.
use federal resources and the partnerships that it has with other provinces to advance its interests. It cannot go it alone in a time of huge disruptive change.
Nope. That is 100% correct. And it's not just the disruptive change of the global environment crisis, the global climate crisis. It's not just the disruptive change of of you know the weather. It's the disruptive change presented by Donald Trump and the collapse of American democracy as we always knew it. I mean, to your American audience, this is, I think, what Canadians don't understand. What are you waiting for when they actually put up the sign that says we're a fascist dictatorship? I mean, it, I think for most Canadians, including most Albertans, watching what is happening to the United States is horrifying. And we don't say that out of judgment or xenophobia. It's because, we too believed that the United States was a beacon of democracy and liberal governance and a defender of the rules-based, you know, international order. And if America falls into chaos, you don't have to call it fascism. You can call it whatever you want. But if America is not a reliable ally in terms of trade, in terms of defense, in terms of national security, then Canadians need to huddle together. The
All of them.
last thing we
All of
need
them.
to be doing is breaking apart. And
Okay.
this is a moment that calls for national reconciliation. This is a moment that calls also, I have to say, as an Albertan, do people in central Canada understand our woes, which we do have? I don't think so. I mean, we don't invite a lot of sympathy with our, what my late beloved father used to call our moan bitching. But we need to be united as a country because where are our allies? I mean, don't see Keir Starmer and the British government speaking up for us. Don't see the EU riding to the rescue. We are going to have to rescue ourselves. And all this, elbows up rhetoric. Well, we need to be together, one united country, now more than at possibly any other time in our history. I mean, Quebec gets this. Alberta needs to get it too.
Paula, this applies directly to you. It's my favorite story, and I'm going to
Okay.
repeat it here again. When I was in graduate school, lo those 40 years ago, I had to read Arnold Toynbee, the British historian,
Yes.
study of history. And the idea that I took away from that was that when civilizations are confronted with an existential crisis, the quality of their leadership determines whether they successfully meet it and flourish, or they don't and they decline. And you're a leader. You're one of Canada's leaders. You're a senator of in the Senate. And the quality of our leadership to respond to Donald Trump and all of the other things we've talked about today will determine where we go as a country over the next, 5, 10 years.
Yeah. Senators in Canada, of course, don't have the power they do in the United States. Uh, but I think that in Ottawa right now, everyone is seized with the urgency of the moment. It's been fascinating to see the Conservatives federally getting behind Mark Carney in a way that would have been,
Yeah.
incomprehensible 8, 10 months ago. To see this much of being on one page, I don't know that it will last because eventually those alliances will start to fray. But in Ottawa, at least, I get a real sense that people understand the urgency of this moment and that whatever their party allegiance, whatever house of parliament that they are in, that they understand that this is a make or break moment for the country.
Okay, I'm going to close with this. We do have to let you go. But while you may not have the power as a Canadian senator an American senator, you are a clear and thoughtful person. And that is exactly the kind of leadership that Canada requires. You may not have your hands on the levers of government all the time or in a direct way, but we need thought leadership, as they say these days. And you're one of the best. So thank you very much
Well,
for coming on the show today.
well, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who has patiently listened to me go on and on. I am now going to drive to Calgary and with luck, try to talk to some people there about some of these issues.
Good luck, because you're going to need it.
Okay, take care.